That afternoon was actually quite ordinary. I had come to a small village in central Java on a light reporting assignment, simply to write about rural life that supposedly still adhered to old customs. The name of the village, oddly enough, I hadn't given it much thought at the time. The road signs were faded, the writing barely legible. Locals simply referred to it as that village. I arrived around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was still bright, the breeze was gentle, and the atmosphere was very calm. Too calm, in fact. There were no children playing, no chickens calling. Even the sound of motorbikes had vanished. As I stopped in front of the seemingly empty village hall, my watch suddenly beeped softly. The evening prayer alarm was almost here, and for some reason, goosebumps rose up my spine, because then I realized not a single house in the village had its lights on.
I tried to calm myself, thinking that perhaps the villagers were still in the fields. I walked deeper along the dirt road that cut through the old wooden houses. On one of the terraces, I saw an old man sitting with his back to the road. I greeted him quietly. He didn't turn around. I repeated, louder. At that moment, the clock on the old mosque, whose dome wasn't visible, suddenly chimed once. The sound was heavy and long, and at that moment, the old man slowly turned toward me. His face was pale, his eyes pitch black without whites, and his voice trembled as he said, "Sir, it's not past sunset yet, is it?" I nodded stiffly. The old man immediately stood up hurriedly, entered the house, and slammed the door loudly. I stood alone, with the clock ticking faster and faster, and the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake in coming to this village.
The sky began to change color, a purplish orange. The wind had stopped completely. I intended to leave the village as soon as possible, but strangely, the road I had been on felt different. Every turn felt unfamiliar. I kept going in circles, always returning to the village hall. My breathing was becoming heavy. In the distance, I could faintly hear the call to prayer, but it was off-key, as if it were being played backwards. That's when I saw something at the end of the road. A woman stood still, her long hair covering her face. She didn't move, but she seemed to get closer every time I blinked. My heart nearly stopped. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the ground. And just as the call to prayer abruptly stopped, the sky darkened. Maghrib had arrived. As darkness fell, the atmosphere of the village changed completely. The houses that had seemed empty before now seemed full. There was a dim light from behind the windows, and shadows moved slowly. I heard the sound of doors creaking, shuffling footsteps, and whispers I couldn't understand. The woman at the end of the street was now very close. I could smell wet earth and blood. Without realizing it, I ran. I entered an open house. The door closed behind me. It was dark inside, except for a small oil lamp in the center of the room. And around it were many people sitting in a circle, their heads bowed, silent. Their faces were blurred, but one thing was clear: none of them were breathing. One of them slowly raised his head. It was the old man from earlier. His face was now cracked like dry earth. "I told you," he said softly. "Until dusk, no outsiders are allowed here." I trembled, asking what he meant by this. The old man laughed softly, bitterly.
He said this village had long been absent from the human world. It had disappeared from maps decades ago due to a single catastrophic error, a failed ritual. Since then, the village only appeared around dusk and was completely theirs when the sun set.
I didn't know whether to believe it or not until I looked at my own hands. My skin was starting to pale. My fingertips were cold. One of the women in the circle stood up, and now I realized she was the figure who had been standing in the street. Her hair was parted, revealing a broken face with empty eyes. "Guests," she said softly, "you can't leave before dawn. If you can't, you'll stay forever." The words pounded into my head. I cried, begged, but there was no sympathy in their faces. They were just victims, trapped, just as I would soon be.
Time seemed to pass slowly. Outside, the voices grew louder. Cries, laughter, screams, all mixed together. Every hour, one of them disappeared, as if pulled from the shadows by something. The old man said that one by one, the old residents were being called away, and replacements were needed. I began to understand why this village always needed lost outsiders. I tried to hold on, reciting a simple prayer, closing my eyes, covering my ears, but the whispers kept coming back to me, trying to persuade me to give up.
As midnight approached, my body grew weaker. I felt like my memories were being dug up. My parents' faces, my house, everything began to blur. The woman approached again, her cold hand touching my shoulder. "Just sleep," she said softly, "so it won't hurt." It was then that I realized that if I fell asleep, I would never wake up as a human. With the last of my strength, I pushed her hand away and ran out of the house. The village had completely changed. The ground seemed to pulsate. The trees tilted, the roads stretched unnaturally long. I ran aimlessly, stumbling, and kept one thing in mind: dawn. As long as dawn hadn't arrived, I still had a chance. In the distance, I saw the faint light of an old mosque. I headed there, hoping for something to save me. Inside, the floor was wet, as if it had been drenched in blood. But in the mihrab, prayer niche, there was a small white light. I sat there, praying as hard as I could. Screams rang out outside. They knew I was here. The mosque door banged, but it wouldn't open. The old clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the final seconds. When the call to prayer finally sounded, its sound was clear and soothing. The village shook violently. Shadows screamed, then disappeared one by one. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the buildings. I fainted. I woke up on the side of the highway, alone in the warm morning sun. There was no village, no houses, just a forest and a deserted road. The map on my phone showed nothing in that location, but on my wrist there was a black mark like dry earth, and to this day, every time dusk arrives, I always hear the sound of the clock chiming once, as if the village was still waiting for me to return.